Well, it's Mother's Day, and we're grateful to have some with us this morning, and I know others weren't able to be here. We're here to not just celebrate mothers, but we have some new graduates among us, high school graduates, college graduates. We have a new nurse among us, and hopefully next year we'll have another nurse, we hope. We're trusting for that. And we want to continue to remember our mothers this morning and thank God for the love of a mother is exhibited like the love of God. It's constant no matter what you look like, what you act like. And that's the gift of mothers to us as a people and as children of God that can look at mothers and see that kind of love. And so we're grateful for mothers this morning. As I was thinking about Mother's Day, I was thinking about, I grew up in a suburb of Kansas City, a middle-class area, a little town called Prairie Village, Kansas, and grew up. It was a nice neighborhood. It was an older neighborhood. It had aged a little bit. Went to a school that sat on 79th Street. And that road that ran along that school, in front of that school, was 79th Street. And it was sort of a demarcation line. It was a demarcation line between one type of neighborhood on the north and another kind of neighborhood on the south. And you knew that 79th Street was this demarcation between, understand everything's relative, especially when we're talking about where people live and circumstances, everything's relative. But if you lived on the north side of 79th Street, where I lived, it was nice, but it was just middle class to lower middle class. You cross 79th Street and miraculously, something happened. And some people talk about you lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. It was sort of like that. You moved to the south side of 79th Street, and it became upper middle class, if not very wealthy. And there was areas in there. There were beautiful homes, and and as you went a little farther south, maybe a couple, 3 blocks or 4 blocks south, you moved into an area called Corinth Hills. Now you can tell from the name, Corinth Hills. Corinthian leather. You know, these were estate-type homes. These are homes, I remember as a kid playing football. He was on my football team in 5th grade, and we went to his house for celebration after the football season, and we played football in his backyard, marked out, even a goalpost. We played football in his backyard. It was that kind of estate home. So there were those that lived on the south side and those that lived on the north side of 79th Street. And anytime you went to somebody's house on the south side, you went, wow, what would it be like to live here? And there was this demarcation, and everybody knew which side of 79th Street you lived on. You knew the kids in your class, oh, they live on the south side. Oh, well, they live on the north side. And there was nothing wrong. And if you were to drive through the neighborhood that I grew up in, you go, oh, this is a nice little neighborhood. But they were not estate homes. And those on the south side knew that they were different, that they lived in different homes, that they were in different socioeconomical circumstances than those that lived on the north side. And everybody knew the difference. And that's sort of what Paul is getting at this morning in this passage that we're going to look at. Hopefully you have your Bible in front of you. Paul is continuing to deal with what does the life of a Christian look like? What does that look like? How should we then live our lives? And he's talking about the contrasts and the issues that are going on in the early church in Rome. Never been there, but he knows it exists. He's heard the rumors. He knows what happens in other churches. He knows how Christians and former Jews think. So we're looking at Romans chapter 2, and hopefully you have your Bible in front of you. Romans chapter 2. We're looking at verses, we're just going to read verses 9 through 11. It's almost a repetition, it's a restatement, if you will, of what we've been looking at in the verses 5 down through 8. Verse 9. There will be trouble and distress for every human being who does evil. First for the Jew, and then for the Gentile. But glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good. First for the Jew, and then for the Gentile. For God does not show favoritism. Now it's interesting that he's sort of being repetitive. And he goes into this, and he'd said it in one way in verses 5 through 8, and now he comes back and he repeats himself. And he's making these two statements basically about that there's two kingdom facts that we found last week. And he's repeating it for emphasis from verses that he's spoken in verses 5 through 8, now verses 9 through 11. He's speaking to the church, he's speaking to Christians. This is not, hey, lost people, found people. Unresponsive people, responsive people. He's not talking about that. He's talking to us, you and me. Those that call ourselves Christian. And he says to them, the general gist is that you get what you do. He talked about, back up in verses 5 and 6, that, hey, there's a repayment that's coming. You're setting aside the actions, the activity, what your life is about, hey, that's being set aside. And you're going to reap what you've set aside. It's the whole idea of you get what you put into life, right? You get out of life what you put into it. How I allow God to work in my life creates a deposit for the ages, for eternity, if you will. Now, last week we discussed these two types of works. And he uses the word work there slightly differently. They're slightly different words. The first word he uses, hey, talking about good works, those are useful, productive activity that God does in and through us. And then he talked about a second kind of work. He talked about, it's really an issue of an attitude. It's the day laborer. It's the idea that, hey, I'm just here to get what I want to get out of this thing. It's an attitude that says, hey, it doesn't matter what the end goal is. I'm here to get what I want to get. I'm here, I've worked for the day, and it's the concept and attitude of, hey, it's about appearances. Hey, I showed up to work, I need a paycheck. That's the mentality that he identifies with evil or bad work. It's the idea of being self-focused. It's the whole concept that, hey, how can I use this circumstance? How can I use God? And how can I use the kingdom for myself? I'm going to show up, I'm going to look good, I'm going to act good when it counts, when it matters, when somebody's watching, and then I'm going to go on with my life. That's the differentiation he makes between good and evil work. A lifestyle is what he's really after. Now, I want you to understand that in verses 9 through 11, specifically in verse 9, he begins to define what those kind of works result in. Now, he's already stated this a little bit. He says, hey, good work, persistence is seeking, it creates glory, honor, and immortality. And then he says self-seeking and rejecting the truth and following evil will result in wrath and anger. And we talked a little bit about that. But I want you to understand that when he goes a little bit further and he defines it a little more, as he talks in verse 9, look with me there, he says, there will be trouble and distress for every human being who does evil. Now, oftentimes when we read this, once again, we come back and say, oh, God is going to bring bad things. If you do evil, God's going to bring bad things upon you. No, that's not the sense and the attitude and the general understanding of what Paul is saying. What he's really getting after is, hey, there's a natural result to the kind of work that you choose, the kind of lifestyle that you choose. And he defines these and he says, listen, there's a result. If you're going to choose the evil or the bad type of works, the attitude of a day laborer, the attitude of, hey, this is about me, the self-focused kind of lifestyle, if you will. Look with me in verse 9. He says, he uses two words, there will be trouble and distress. The word trouble is that word we've talked about over these past number of years. It goes along with the concept of perseverance that he used back up in verse 6. It's the idea of a wine press. It's the word thlipsis. I love that word, thlipsis. We don't have a word like that in English, but it's the idea of pressure and squeezing. The thlipsis is the idea that it's the whole concept of pressing out the wine. So the result, if you're going to choose to live in your own self, if you're going to have a day laborer mentality, is the natural result of that. God is not imposing that upon you. It's just a natural result. There is going to be pressure and squeezing and difficulty, if you will. Now, we translate it here as trouble. But it's the whole idea of your life just being squeezed to the point of pain, the point of heartache, the point of difficulty. And I think we can see that in people's lives. I think we can see that live itself out, not just in the church, but in the wider world. We can see that, hey, a life that's filled with evil results in difficulty. For instance, we have this fun phrase, crime never pays, right? Now, we think of crime as evil. Well, it is. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to take what I want to take. But crime never pays. I remember watching Batman and thinking about that. Crime never pays. Well, Robin, crime never pays. That's true. It's this, there's a constant natural result that if you're going to live in that kind of lifestyle, there's going to be this squeezing, this difficulty, this heartache, this brokenness, this idea of a wine press. Now, there's a second natural result. That when I self-focus and I have the attitude of being a day laborer, he uses the word, it's translated the word distress. That's really not it is distress. But it's really the bigger understanding of the word, maybe a deeper understanding of the word is there's a thinning, a narrowing, a wearing down, a paltriness, a poorness. It's a progressive word that means, hey, you're getting whittled away. Now, oftentimes we think, okay, that must be the result of that, and that's going to happen physically. And looking at this passage, it sort of makes sense. Okay, yeah, that's about your circumstances in your life. Your lifestyle is going to be squeezed, and you're going to have this whittling down, this narrowing, this wretchedness, this distress, if you will. But he's not talking about the kind of house you live in, or the kind of car you drive, or the job that you have. He's not talking about that at all. In fact, and there are times that I really struggle with some English translations because they leave out a word. They're not changing the understanding, but the key word that Paul is focusing on is missing here, and I want you to see it. In verse 9, he says, there will be trouble and distress for every human being who does the works of evil. But when they translate the word human being, they've left out the word soul. See, this is not about what my bank account looks like. This is not about, hey, whether we get to go out to eat on Sunday afternoon. This is about who I am. And in essence, that's what it is to be a human being. It's my soul, it's my heart. You see, the squeezing happens not to my life circumstances, but to my soul. The thinning, the wearing away, the paltriness, the wretchedness. See, that doesn't happen out here it happens in my soul. See, the soul of every man is going to reap this result. It's a natural thing. God is not sitting around going, zap. No, it's a natural result. If you're living in the midst of self-centeredness, if you're living and you're trying to just do a day laborer's type work in your life, hey, I'm just here, I'm going to do what I want. This is all about me. This is not about anybody else. This is not about me responding to God. Then this soul effect begins to happen. Who I am deep inside. See the picture that he's drawing here? There's this thinning, this wearing away, this wretchedness. And you can see it, can't you, in people's lives? When they live in this kind of evil works, you can see that their spirit shrivels, their soul shrivels, it shrinks, it becomes less. And they live in the midst of this squeezing, and oftentimes that's seen in anxiety, that's seen in difficulty in their mental state. Have you ever noticed that folks that do not respond to God the way in which Paul is talking about, and I want you to understand there's no accusation here. It happens to all of us. That when I choose to not live in relationship with God that Paul is talking about here, my soul is damaged, shrunk up, pressured, squeezed, troubled. See, it's not about my life circumstance. It's about who I am, because you understand, you and I, when we go into eternity, all we carry is our soul, ourselves. See, the car you drive, you won't have that on Streets of Gold. I've never seen a hearse hauling a U-Haul. You've heard that phrase. What I make of my life now does not matter on the other side. What I carry on the other side is this suke word, the word soul, who I really am. See, the difficulty happens on the inward person. Now, I want you to notice another word. When he speaks of the word of evil, for every human who does evil, the word does there is another type of the word work. It's not a work that we've talked about that is productive, but it's a work that is a concept of refining and constant use of evil. It's the idea of repetitive action. It's not, hey, I did wrong once. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, hey, this constant activity, this constant mentality and focus on doing evil. See, it has a result. It is a refiningly constant whittling down. See, so he not only uses a whittling word for the idea of distress, but he uses a whittling word, a word of constant use and wearing down. It's the kind of work that's like tearing away. That it is constantly, evil is constantly being worked at. And the evil is this day laborer mentality of self-centeredness. The wrong is not that I'm out robbing banks. Maybe it is. But that I'm all about what I want when I want it, as opposed to waiting upon God. Hupomone that we talked about last week, which is this, what are you going to do next, God? I'm focused on Him as opposed to being focused on myself. See, that's what he's really after. Now, he makes the contrast and he goes on. Okay, that's what evil looks like. Now, I want to show you what good looks like. Verse 10. But glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good. Now, the word does there is the word work again. It's what we talked about last week. It is this productive work. It is the result of God doing His thing in and through us. Not me doing my thing, but Him doing His thing. That's the concept of work. It's a production of something that really I don't produce, but I'm allowing that work to occur. And he says, here's the result of that. He uses the word glory. The word glory there really is the concept of favorable reputation, of good standing. Hey, good, everybody knows that something good is going on. That's the idea of glory. There's a second word. He uses the word honor. And that's the idea of satisfaction, of compensation. That something positive has happened and it has effect in my life of being satisfying. There's a third thing, and he says the word peace. That's really the concept he's after. You see, when you do this good kind of work, when you live in this kind of response to God, as opposed to the self-centered response, it results in rest, a lack of conflict, peace. See, I think that's really what we're after. In fact, I know it's Mother's Day, but constantly I'm reminded of the fact that, men just want one thing in their life. We just want peace. Can things get calm around here? Can I just get a little peace? See, what Paul is talking about is the result of this is that there's this ongoing, constant, eternal, it's all good. I got a little peace around here. You see, the early church, they lived in this dichotomy, these two different places. See, the church believed that God was on the side of the Jews and those that have responded to Christ. And everybody else God was against. Now, Paul lays this out and he says, listen, there's evil and there's good. There's right and there's wrong. And Paul says, in verse 11, he makes this amazing statement that oftentimes I think we forget. I think we know it, oh yeah, I know. God is not a respecter of persons. Do we really know that? Because I'm not sure the church acts that way. I don't think it acted like that in Rome, and I don't think it acts like that today. Here's what he says in verse 11. For God does not show favoritism. You know what Paul's saying? He doesn't care if you live on the north side of 79th or the south side of 79th. He doesn't care if you've got a small house or an estate home. He doesn't care which side you come from. But see, the church believes, well, we live on the south. We're good. We can do whatever. Hey, listen, life is good. Those people on the north side, glad I'm not them. But God is not prejudiced. We have so much talk in our world today of prejudice. The word that Paul uses here is he does not lift up faces. Meaning he's not sitting around making choices by what you look like, by what side of this 79th you live on. He's not making choices by whether you attend church on Sunday morning. That's not his focus. He's not a respecter of persons. The problem is, I'm not sure we believe that. Because some of us may have been, and he talks about the Jews, some were chosen. And the implication is that some have been adopted into the family of chosen people. That's us. We've been adopted into this chosenness. But God does not care. Isn't that interesting that Paul says it so frankly? I mean, he is just saying, hey, God doesn't care which side of 79th you grew up on. In fact, truth be known, he's hedging towards those that live on the north side. See, the question is not whether you are a Christian this morning. The question isn't, well, I grew up in a Christian home. Good for you. Well, I've been baptized. I've been saved. See, that's not the question. Paul is heading at this really hard. He's saying, hey, listen, it doesn't matter whether you've been dunked, hit your head on the altar however many times, it doesn't matter. What matters is, what kind of work are you doing? What kind of work are you doing that affects your soul? Who you really are. I don't care where you are on Sunday morning. I don't care what's going on with what family you grew up in. I don't care what your heritage is. What kind of work are you doing now? Because there's going to be a natural result. One is going to lead to good standing and peace and rest. The other is going to lead to the whittling away of who you are, your very self. Your soul is shriveling. See two pictures. Brokenness, squeezing, whittling to nothing. The other is ever expanding. See, what's happening with your soul this morning? Is your self-focus creating, or is your seeking creating? See, I can't determine that for you, and I'll be honest with you. So many times we get so involved in, quote, building a life. Oh, look at the life I've built. God says, I don't care. God says, I'm not worried about your life. I'm not worried about that. Hey, that's all going to go away. There's no U-Hauls happening here. What's happening to your soul? What kind of soul are you building? Not what kind of church. Hey, not that you're in church every Sunday. Not that you are, my grandfather was I hear that all the time. Well, I have a history in the church. God doesn't care. What's happening to your soul? Is there this crushing, whittling, constant use of evil and self? Focus on me. Or is there this ever-expanding, growing, moving, continuing that leads to rest? Let's pray. Father, would you come and point to our very souls this morning, whether we are expanding or shriveling, growing or shrinking. Father, I know in this moment, you're not concerned whether we're American, whether we're white or black, brown. You have one focus. Not on my neighborhood, but on who I become. Would you change and move and speak in each of us? Not a self-focus. Would you point out where we're not seeking, where we're not responding, where we're not living in a work that produces because you are producing through us? Come and build our souls this morning, Jesus. Come and move us to whatever neighborhood you want us to be in. We'll trust you that we will come to a place that you've brought us to peace, not because of our labels, but because you're doing a work in us. For it's in Jesus' name we pray.